Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland, my weekly show where I take a deep dive into a particular film. And we're just moving all along in my series of Alfred Hitchcock films. We're still in his first year of talkies because he dropped three movies in 1930 because they don't do it like that anymore. But joining me is my good friend and collaborator, Clarissa. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me back, Shane. I love that we talked about Hitchcock forever ago and like we mentioned it, and then you were like, hey, I'm doing Hitchcock. Let's do it. So I have been dying to do this, dive into this movie that I have actually never seen before this prep. So I'm really excited and thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. And yes, it is time to dive into some Hitchcock here. But before we get started, would you like to shamelessly plug where people can find some of your content and what you do?
Totally. So I've seen that one on Instagram and TikTok, and I also have a podcast. Also, I've seen that one. And I actually have a book that I'm following with my
Mhm.
podcast. So we're working through it movie by movie. And that's kind of like my current journey. It's been so much fun to delve into. And I've been really working on making sure that I'm refining all of my movie watching areas.
Mhm.
So, like, we've got these really early sound films I'm trying to like refine my palette on. Horror, I'm gonna dive into a lot of Golden Age Christmas this year. And
Nice.
it's just been a really fun journey being able to diversify the movies I'm watching. So yeah, follow along. It's gonna be great.
Absolutely. And I'll be there for a couple of those. So all of you
Yes, you
tuning
will.
in. So we already recorded one of them. So there we go. Um, let's dive in to Murder, which is our episode here, which if any movie would be directed by Alfred Hitchcock, it certainly would be one just murder exclamation point. And this
Yeah,
was released July 31st, 1930, has a runtime of 101 minutes. The budget was $200,000 and it made $600,000, so made some money. Good for them. And this is based on Enter Sir John by Clemence Dane and Helen Simpson, which this originally was actually called Enter Sir John, and then they decided to, keep it simple and just call it Murder, which
classic.
I feel like you would want the more unique title to the movie, but that is not what they decided. Um,
Yeah.
this is co-written by Alma Vile, who's Hitchcock's wife. So this was an interesting collaboration for him and his wife on this film. This was, like I mentioned, it was originally going to go by the book's title, and then they wanted to simplify things. Sir John Mernier was based on Hitchcock's friend Gerard du Maurier, who he would Hitchcock would later adapt three of du Maurier's daughter Daphne's writings. So this kind of came full circle where it's like he based his character off of his friend, and then his friend's daughter became a very famous writer, and he wound up adapting a few of her writings as well. So there you go.
That is so fun. I had no idea. I did a little bit of research into this movie as well,
Mhm.
and I didn't even see that. So that is so cool. I love that it stayed in the family. I love also that he worked with his wife. That's something I didn't
Yeah.
know. I knew that for Psycho because I watched the kind of biopic with Sir Anthony Hopkins and Helen
Yeah.
Mirren. But I didn't know how much. I mean, I knew that they kind of worked hand in hand, but again, I didn't look into it much outside of that like biopic. So I love that she collaborated on this movie too. Um, a couple of things that I snagged, if it's okay, can I throw in some behind the scenes too?
All right.
Love it. Okay, this is the first film in which a person's thoughts are presented on the soundtrack, which I thought was so cool. I thought that was really fun, and I'm thinking of like multiple moments in this movie where they have that kind of like overplaying inner voice over the
Mhm.
music, which kind of leads into this other fact I've got with Sir John thinking out loud in front of the mirror. That had to be filmed with a recording of the lines and a 30-piece orchestra hidden behind the set. It was not possible to post dub the soundtrack. So for the filming, an orchestra played the music live on the set, and Alfred Hitchcock described the filming of this scene in oh, in this certain book, I think that's what they're referencing. It's called New York, Simon and Schuster from 1967. Um, he said there was no way to post dub sound in these early days of like sound at the time. So he had Sir Herbert Marshall's voice recorded on a phonograph record, which was then played during filming with the orchestra playing hidden behind the set. So a lot of elaboration went into that. And I feel like you can kind of see that as people now who like are used to sound in movies, but I'm sure at the time I would watch this voiceover and be completely
Like,
appalled.
well,
Yes.
and what's interesting, because like I mentioned, this is his first year doing sound because he released three
Hmm.
films this year.
Yeah.
And you can tell that sound has hamstrung some of his filmmaking. And I think we'll
Hmm.
talk about that because, this was that time where it's like, hide the microphone in the flowers and everybody has to stand
Yeah.
around like a static place.
Right. Yeah.
And you still see some fleeting moments of dynamic filmmaking, and they're in quieter moments when he didn't have to worry about picking up dialogue and stuff like that, which I'm sure we'll talk
Hmm.
about a few moments that stood out in the film. But here we do have a story, a juror in a murder trial after voting to convict has second thoughts and begins to investigate on his own before the execution. And this is obviously directed by Alfred Hitchcock and starring Herbert Marshall, Nora Barring, and Phyllis Constam and Edward Chapman. But, Clarissa, what were your general thoughts on Murder?
I absolutely love this one because this is the earliest Hitchcock movie that I've ever seen.
Mhm,
I actually feel like my Hitchcock knowledge is a little bit capped at like his getting close to the end of the code, like between Strangers on a Train and
mhm.
like Rear Window or Vertigo. I feel like that's kind of the years that I'm most familiar with his work. And so it's really fun to go back and watch this that is like during an age of very early sound development and seeing what he did with it. I feel like I saw so many things in this movie that just were so telling to like his ability as a director. I mean, that moment with Sir John is so cool and beautiful. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I totally see Hitchcock in this. But overall, I absolutely loved it. It felt like for anyone who's listening who hasn't seen it, um, it's like if 12 Angry Men met Stage Fright by Hitchcock with
Mm.
Marlene Dietrich, which actually, yeah, maybe that's the earlier one that I've seen is Stage Fright. I really like Stage Fright. But I'm like, if those two movies kind of met, I feel like you would have this movie. So, so yeah, if you like those movies, this is a great one for you. And I have like so many nitty-gritty notes on this movie, but I'm sure we'll kind of delve into the plot here and some stuff.
Which is interesting because Stage Fright came 20 years after this movie, which is
No
wild
way.
because that was 1950.
It so does not feel like it. Are you serious? Wait, the one with
Mhm.
Marlene Dietrich? Hitchcock movie timeline. That is so crazy. You're blowing my mind right now. Oh
What's
my gosh.
interesting, so like IMDb says this was released in 1950. What's interesting is so many people obviously are really familiar with Hitchcock's big films, right? And what's
Hmm.
even more wild is they're like all his like last 15 movies.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was like, I'm going to be doing 60 films in this series that are available. And like,
Hmm.
I'm not going to be getting to like Psycho until like next August. Um,
Yeah.
it's that
Yeah.
crazy. But he had been making films for decades
Uh-huh.
and delivering some really interesting films. And this one, I think this might be my 13th episode so far. And this is certainly towards the top. And it's definitely leaning into those motifs and ideas and genres that Hitchcock really found his groove with.
Hmm.
Is this crime thriller mystery type of story. And what's interesting is from even from like one of the opening shots of this, where it's like you have this camera going down and you're like getting involved in like the neighborhood and you see people hanging out the window. What's going on? And getting this perspective. But there's this amazing shot of a woman sitting there, the camera moving down her side, and you see this bloody weapon right next to her, and it's just panning across. There's no dialogue, like she's not talking, you don't need that. And this camera is just really capturing it's like, oh, this woman's in some trouble. And right from that shot, you see like that's Hitchcock.
Yeah.
Hitchcock knows how to navigate a space and
Hmm.
tell a story without having to say anything. And you see moments through that. There are some, I think there's a lot of like talking kind of moments where you can feel it limited by where they can record audio and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
definitely.
But there are some interesting, like even like the jury sequence where like the camera's just like panning around. Like this is
Hmm.
1930. That's not like a common normal shot that you'd see
No.
in things.
No, it's
And
ambitious. Yeah.
it's very dynamic in terms of capturing this whole group of people who are all coming from different perspectives. And what I thought was very interesting is when they're like counting the votes, you can tell that he kept this very naturalistic because they kept messing up.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's like, it's not the not guilty like pile, and they had to keep switching them, and he was counting them like,
Yeah.
man, Fury Foreman, you're doing a terrible job. Um,
Terrible job.
and counting those up. But I thought that was such an interesting choice because you could easily have just reshot it,
Uh,
but it's just something very naturalistic about it.
hmm.
And like this goes all the way up to like the final big moments of the film. There's some shocking visuals and visual
Yeah.
storytelling. The resolution of this story, which generally we spoil things on this show. This film's also 95 years old. So
Yeah, you've had the chance.
because like this is still like an era where they're not gonna like show you like horrific violence, but they will
No.
show you somebody tying a noose, and then you see them jump off screen and just see hanging rope there, and you're just
Yeah,
like I remember watching this yesterday and just being like, whoa, like that was dark.
appalling. And it's the fact too that we had all of those like overlay shots
Yeah,
as like this trapeze
yeah.
performer is swinging and it's just building that tension and then just that is crazy. I completely agree. That moment had like chills down my spine. So good.
It's like Hitchcock knows how to get a response out of you.
Yeah.
And like throughout this film, and even just like little moments of when they're in the courtroom at the beginning, the editing and the shot composition of like the judge is talking, and then the jury like shifts their heads over, and then it edits, and then it cuts
Yeah.
to like the barrister, and it's just like, huh. And you take for
Hmm.
granted shots like that. Like
Yeah.
it really reminded me of the tennis scenes from Strangers on a Train because
Yes.
like them going back and forth following the ball and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's really impressive. Like it's impressive seeing a filmmaker earlier in their career showing some of those signs of like
Hmm.
somebody special here
This is
and
good.
doing some interesting things. And then overall, this story of like, who is this woman? Like we're just dropped right into this. And
Hmm.
why would she kill her here? Why would she do this? She doesn't have an explanation. We go through this whole jury thing, and then this one juror feels so attached and like, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't have voted guilty. And then takes
Hmm.
it upon himself to go through this whole entire thing and the twists and turns along the story. It's a really interesting plotted story too that has
Hmm.
like it mixes courtroom drama, it mixes like this inadvertent like PI type story. Like obviously he's not an actual private investigator, but like he is a citizen trying to investigate this thing. And it
Hmm.
has like some of those like bits of noirish kind of feel.
Yeah.
Um and of course, like in any Hitchcock film, it's gonna end in like a big unexpected and interesting kind of setting. Cause like who would have expected this movie to end with a giant like circus performance and stuff like that?
Hmm.
So there's just a lot of those types of elements that really stood out to me about the film.
Yeah, definitely. Honestly, so many of my notes that I put down are things that you mentioned because they really are so innovative for the time. I love
Mhm.
that you mentioned too, like the way that he was just manipulating staging to his
Yeah,
advantage, like those jurors. And it's so funny. I mean, it's like taking this kind of serious moment and it almost feels like comedic because it's just like glance, glance, glance. And it's so funny to
mhm.
me. Um, and I think too, there is a shot that's like an aerial shot. I think it's in the courtroom. And that one really surprised me. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like, we didn't really see aerial shots at this point in cinematic history. And I like that we have this mix of the clearly like stage to film translation that was very prevalent during this time
Yeah,
in like the industry. So we have a lot of movies that look just like a stage adaptation because they're still not used to translating all those things that you can do with a camera and some of
yeah,
those camera innovations weren't made yet to move like we were talking about. But I love the way that it was used in stage and that it played off of them being actors and working in the arts. Like that
yeah,
final scene when they are like kind of reunited, like him and Diana, or yeah, him and Diana. And it's like almost this sweet moment, and then it like zooms out and they're on a stage. I'm like
yeah,
mind blown because I also love that we have this confession at the end as being quote unquote finishing the play. And
yeah,
that's how this happens. And it's all on this note before he's climbing the ladder. And there's also so many things to talk about too, with like the way that they play with gender here, because there were
mhm.
not women on juries during this time. But we have a lot, like a pretty good chunk of women that were a part of this jury in the 30s. And it's like kind of surprising and we also have somebody who was like cross-dressing, or I'm not sure if it was like they were transgender, because I don't think that was really clearly defined. Like,
Like
did you catch that?
was that like a female barrister at the beginning of the movie? Because I'm like, I was looking, I'm like, I don't
I
think
thought the
this is
same
a
thing.
man, but like
Yeah,
it was something that stood out because yeah, that's
yeah.
not something you would expect in that kind of
Hmm.
setting. I'm like, was the
Oh
UK
no,
like a lot more progressive than the United
it
States in the 1930s?
was.
Yeah,
It was, and you know what? That even was one thing to mention on here was like the UK's policies on juries were very different than the US's. And this was one of the pictures of Hitchcock's where he got the closest to working with Columbia Pictures, but he didn't quite get there because it was filmed in the UK. So that's like, so there's some like stuff there. But I think it's really interesting to read about like these dynamics and also having our killer be somebody who is either like I mean, I really didn't catch if Thane is clearly like homosexual or like transgender or a cross-dresser for the time for the performance. Like those were some things that I just
yeah,
didn't really fully catch, but they still were innovative regardless. Like even if it wasn't clear, because again, this was a time when things like that weren't always as clear, but even mentioning them was like you said, kind of progressive. And so I
yeah.
thought that was really interesting to play around with. Um, but I really loved the way that this felt eerie. And I think that the
Mhm.
way that it was staged really plays off of that. There are moments where, and one of the notes that I put in there was Hitchcock manipulates the stage, and then all caps, amazing, because I'm like looking at when they're behind the stage of an actual stage, and we're watching them like from what we would be perceiving as an audience, but they're on stage, so
Yeah,
it's like this this like what is the word I'm looking for? Like postmodern, just like hyper awareness almost in a way, but it's not breaking the fourth wall. So it's really fun to like play around with, and Hitchcock does it so much. Like we said, that ending, it zooms out and all of a sudden you're back on stage. And so it almost leaves this feeling of like, okay, were these actors and actresses pretending the whole time with this case? Were like, was anything sincere or was anything real? What was real? What was staged? Because I'm confused on some of these things. And it's because Hitchcock like planted that seed, and it's clearly not like the whole basis of the movie to feel like confused, but there's like just enough there for me where I was noticing it, where I'm like, I like that. I don't know
Yeah.
if these people are pretending, and I don't trust them. And that's like a really fun side to it. So I love that we had, and I compare it to 12 Angry Men for that reason, where it's like we have Sir John, who it's almost like that alternate ending to 12 Angry Men before 12 Angry Men was a thing, where it's like if Henry Fonda had voted guilty, would he have pulled this Sir John thing that Hitchcock's doing here and just been like, I'm gonna go figure it out. I don't think I voted right. I think that would be the case. But no, it's fun. It's fun to see that side of it, and I think Sir John's whole journey is really cool. So yeah, I just so many thoughts and feelings about this. A lot of shifts cinematically and like going between the weather vane and the noose, like
Yes.
just cool stuff. Cool stuff. Yeah, it was awesome. And a lot of implied stuff, which is powerful. And Hitchcock's good at that. He's good at implications.
Absolutely. But no, that was another moment that really stood out to me. Like that Weatherman cutting between that and the noose was like, this is haunting and
Huh.
like really unnerving. And with the setup of like the gallows and stuff like that, I'm like,
Hmm.
Hitchcock really knows how to set a
Yeah.
mood. And you have
Hmm.
all the like trapeze moments. There's so much shadow in those shots and
Yes.
everything where like
Yeah.
there's a one particular shot of like him set up to do this whole trapeze act and there's something just menacing just looking at like the shadows on them. And it's very interesting because this there's so many films at this point that are a lot of like it's a courtroom film and like did it need to
Hmm.
be this dynamic? I'm like, yes, it did because it's Hitchcock.
Yeah.
Um, and he really understands how to move a camera around in a space.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
making things more dynamic than it's like you could easily just like point out something, but he uses it as an eye to draw attention to certain things. And that would be
Hmm.
something that he would do in so many of his films after this for certain. And it just all those moments is like it's so funny because my wife will get a chuckle out of like something like that'll happen like that was a really good shot. I'm just like sitting there watching the movie. I'm like, yep, that got my attention. I
That's
appreciate it.
nice. Yeah.
Well, and even like the staging at the very end of the film where like it reveals that like this is where like this is how this is actually happening and revealing like there's this other layer to what we've been seeing at the very end, this connection again between these characters. And this is something that like filmmakers still do today. And it's a really interesting choice. And I wanted to draw attention to that because so like it as it reveals like the camera pulls back and reveals that this is the last scene of a new play with the two of them starring in this and the curtains close and everything. I watched Sentimental Value, which is supposed to be one of like the big Oscar contenders for this year, and it has a similar type of ending in a strange way to this, and I'm just like Hitchcock trendsetter. Because like
Yeah.
filmmakers 95 years later are still utilizing that kind of idea where we transition our story into a sense of storytelling within it and
Hmm.
giving us this satisfying like because the film didn't need to tell us that they built this connection. It shows us that they're now doing plays together. So
Yeah.
obviously they have made this connection, and it's just a fun, interesting, and creative kind of way to sell that
Hmm.
moment at the end. And I think you mentioned like a courtroom shot, like this eagle eye kind of like above what's going on. And there's a couple of shots like that that are really interesting and dynamic. And it just allows you to feel like, I know there's some people get turned off by like too showy of filmmaking where it's just like with the unmotivated camera movement where it's just like
Yeah.
when you notice that the camera is a camera and it's moving around and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. If I'm gonna watch a movie, I want to feel like somebody's doing something interesting with it.
Yeah.
And I feel like Hitchcock was one of those filmmakers that really put their stamp on that kind of idea of delivering something more dynamic than just, well, here's a static shot at things. Just take it in. And that was one of
Hmm.
the things that frustrated me about his last film, Juno and the Paycock, felt so much just like set up like a stage play and just watching it. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because Hitchcock didn't want to do sound. Blackmail, his first film, the studios, he actually had a silent version of the film and sound version of the film. And what's so interesting watching all of his silent films, they barely had any dialogue cards because his whole thing was I'm going to do some visual storytelling. You're not going to need cards to understand what's going on screen because he
Yeah.
mastered that in the silent era. And it's cool seeing him translate that still in these films that have sound anyway.
Hmm. I agree. That's one thing that I feel like, because I actually haven't seen any of Hitchcock's silent films, but that's one thing that I felt was really notable for me in this film that I'm noticing is that I'm feeling this transition from silence to sound. And I feel like he's doing it so gracefully because of exactly that. He didn't need the filler. There were times where
Yep.
he wasn't using sound. He wasn't like, I mean, it was completely silent. There wasn't even the static because you could tell he hadn't put, like the sound in there for that. And maybe that's also budgeting. But I'm like, there's so much intention here where he didn't even need that. He didn't need the sound. Like,
Mhm.
I'm now cognizant of when there is and when there isn't sound and how it's impacting my journey with this film. And I feel like that's when I was also paying more attention to those things that he was doing in those scenes because I'm like, he's not using it. He's not banking on dialogue. He's not banking
Yep.
on like any of these little like a door shutting. And again, like sound effects were kind of harder to like throw in there unless again you had a mic right by the door as it's shutting or a
Yeah.
drawer is shutting or you're lighting a match, like, all those things. But yeah, you can just see so much the intentionality. I really want to add those movies that you've been talking about too from his silent era to my list because I'm like, these are things, especially getting into this movie where I'm seeing those things in that kind of combination. I'm like, this is a really good opportunity to take advantage of that and see him diversify technologically
Yeah.
as well as a director. Because then we have later on, we have the dolly zoom that he's inventing. Like there is so much that Hitchcock contributed to in the industry and honestly to film as an art form. And I feel like this one of these early movies is one where you're also seeing that. So I love that you mentioned that. Tangential, but yes, I love that.
But I think The Lodger, the London Fog film and The Manx Man are probably the two that really stood out to me from his silent era. One's a tragic romance, this love triangle, The Manx Man, and the other one is like very much Hitchcock kind of um suspense thriller, leaning
Mhm.
into those kinds of elements. And you know, even Blackmail, which mostly is in sound but still has some silent sequences in it. But I think the cast did a really fine job here too, bringing it to life. It just this really like the star of this movie was Hitchcock. I really
Mhm.
feel like, and even just like shots, like I'm going through some of the stills that they have on IMDb, and they have this reverse shot of sitting across from this table in the prison, and it feels like there's so much distance
Yes.
between. the
Yeah.
characters because how the shot is framed and like he's on one end looking so much far back than her, and then it cuts
Hmm.
to her and there's shadows of bars across
Yeah.
the wall, and it's just like
Yes. So good.
it's
So
like
good.
so intentional, and just
Hmm.
having those types of moments. And this was one that really stood out to me, and I hadn't watched this one yet. There's still a few more on my little set here that I haven't checked out, but I will be obviously because I'm going to be watching all of them. Um, and this is an interesting era of Hitchcock and seeing him slowly evolve in terms of how he's making that transition from silent film to talkies. And I'm still like 2 months out before I really hit like, hey, I'm gonna have the 39 steps and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which are some
Yeah.
bigger names of his films. But
Hmm.
this one's definitely one of those early ones that, hey, if you want to dabble into some early Hitchcock, like this is one to really check out because
Hmm.
this really starts to show where he's going to go as a filmmaker, a visual storyteller for sure, and really a
Hmm.
master of suspense and thrillers and stuff like that. It's like, this is what he
Yeah.
does. This is what he's known for.
Definitely. I love that. I think it's such a good point too. I love that we also have it that it's the name Murder,
Mhm.
like one of these early ones too, where it's just like, yeah, he could have named it like super closely to the book and had a more unique name. But how Hitchcock is it to just have that be like, and
Drop that
and
there.
now especially yes, and especially now that we have all these other films of his that we've had, like that you were talking about, and that we're gonna have going forward, where he has set such a precedent for the thriller genre and like suspense mystery. I feel like this is such a great example of that. I completely agree.
Absolutely. I guess, Clarissa, did you have anything else that you wanted to add about murder to our conversation?
No, honestly, well, I will say if anybody wants like is going to watch this movie, be really intentional about maybe noting what you're noticing. Because this is one where I'm like, I am so happy that I was like actively taking notes
Hmm.
because now I'm looking back and I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, like I get to relive
Yeah,
watching this movie and like appreciating everything that Hitchcock is doing because of that. And this is one where it's just really fun to get into it that way. And so I think like that was one of the biggest benefits for me doing this was like I was taking notes for this episode, but it also just became really fun. Like I have probably 7 or 8 notes in here that are like awesome in all caps or amazing.
yeah,
Wow, because it's so fun. So try and like maybe give that an opportunity, but definitely watch this one. This is one that is like I don't even know if this is one that I would have added to my list if it hadn't been for this show. And I'm so grateful. And now I'm like, oh wow, we've really got to get people watching these early Hitchcocks. They're clearly so important. And it makes me wonder, I'm like, oh, what was this catalytic for during this time in the industry? Like what was he adding to it? And so it's really fun to think about. But yeah, everyone keep these in mind. I'm gonna dive into Silent Hitchcock. I am really pumped about that, and I will keep you posted. But yeah, those are all of my thoughts. Really, this is just such a beautiful movie. Really well done.
absolutely. And this is certainly one of those first, I think, this and Blackmail are those first sound triumphs for Hitchcock, and it's a very exciting thing. And obviously, there's no turning back now. We have a 50, 43, 47 more Hitchcock films after this that are all in sound.
Yeah.
And obviously eventually we'll be getting some of the bigger ones, but some of these more forgotten classics are interesting to get a chance to check out. But Clarissa, thank you so much for coming on and talking movies with me.
Oh my gosh, I cannot even thank you enough. I love your show. I love chatting with you. I'm so excited to have you back on my show, but I have
Yes.
been so grateful to be back on here for yours. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me for Hitchcock. Like, this was so great.
Absolutely. And for next week, I'll be diving into a short film from Hitchcock. Let's Go Bathing, which is a comedy short. And my buddy Luke, who's a frequent collaborator of mine, will be joining me for that episode. But most importantly, thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.